Thanks, Prabhakar, and thank you everyone for attending this morning. My name is Manu. My native village is Sembanur. I grew up in a city outside of Houston, and I live in Dallas today. I'm a strategy director at a medical device company that's backed by the private equity firm, the Blackstone Group. I hope to convince you in this talk that a career in management consultancy is a noble profession. And even more importantly, we'll explore whether management consulting fills the Greek definition of happiness for you. There's a quote that I think about every morning when I look at myself in the mirror, and I ask myself whether I'm happy with what I'm doing with my life. And that quote is from John F. Kennedy. It reads as, "I saw how ideally politics filled the Greek definition of happiness. A full use of your powers along lines of excellence in a life-affording scope." Because this quote is so important to me, we're going to use it, this Greek definition of happiness, as the lens through which we'll explore careers in management consulting for the majority of this talk. So we'll get into more detail about what this quote exactly means a little later in the talk. But first, a little bit about myself. Before I worked in management consulting, I did my PhD in cancer imaging. I moved into consulting to bring the scientific method to problems in management. Here are some pictures from my PhD dissertation, the X-ray imaging setup that I used, and a picture of one of the breast tissue samples removed from a patient in a lumpectomy procedure that I did some imaging experiments on. I then moved to McKinsey & Company, where I worked as a management consultant. One of the motivations for the move was in order to have a more immediate term impact that I could have doing research. But I was also very inspired by the ideal of bringing problem solving and the ability to apply the scientific method that PhDs develop in order to bring value to problems in management and to better run companies, governments, nonprofits, and other kinds of organizations. I found that I've had a similar intellectual satisfaction in working on business problems in consulting as I had in academic research. And I've enjoyed that the problems I get to work on are more mainstream and that I get to work on more interdisciplinary content, like thinking about multiple fields like strategy, finance, and operations. I got the opportunity to work with executives at the private equity firm, the Blackstone Group, to turn around one of their portfolio companies to grow its profitability in a short period of time in order for the Blackstone Group to get a return on its investment. And so I jumped at that opportunity. And so today I'm at a medical device company called DJO Global. And 10 years from now, I see myself as being a leader in the medical device or digital health space because of my experience at DJO in the medical device industry and my PhD. In roles of increasing responsibility, potentially culminating in a high-level strategy role, a CXO role, or maybe switching into private equity or venture capital. So those are my long-term goals. On the side, I run a problem-solving interview coaching company, and I'm now publishing a book on the topic. So old habits die hard. During my PhD, something that academic researchers have to do a lot is writing papers, writing a book like a dissertation. So due to my academic tendencies, this year I wrote a book about my problem-solving coaching philosophy. It's going to be available in paperback and Kindle on January 1st. The Kindle version is available for pre-order now. And the majority of the book is about this 7-step problem-solving process that consultants use to add value and solve their clients' problems. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later. It's really an adaptation of the scientific method that academic researchers use to do their research. So now an introduction to management consultancy. What do management consulting firms do? They help organizations improve their performance, whether that be businesses, nonprofits, governments, other types of organizations. These are the management consulting firms. Some examples, the ones that I'm most familiar with, where I placed clients. What do management consultants do? What kind of skills do they have? The way I see it, there's primarily, you can think of it as 4 skills that management consultants have. The first is because they serve so many clients in a given industry or function, they become knowledge practitioners, aware and knowledgeable about the best practices in that industry or function that they can share with their clients. Number 2, they're their own salespeople. So consultants become very good at selling and general client management. Number 3, because they're constantly in new projects, having to work on new complex problems, they become very good at problem solving. And number 4, because they work so closely in teams, internally and with their clients, they become very good at teamwork. Only 2 of these skills are required at the entry level. So if you are considering exploring a career in management consulting, you don't necessarily have to today be a knowledge practitioner about some particular industry or function. Getting back to that Greek definition of happiness, what does it mean, and how does consulting score against this Greek definition of happiness? So consulting roles score very on 2 out of the 3 criteria. The first criteria is a full use of your powers. I see this as meaning, do you get to apply your strengths, the things that you're good at, and is it a full use of it? Is it challenging? I think management consulting scores very high here. I give it an A+, because it's as intellectual as scientific research, which is one of my powers, and so I get to fully use that. There's a challenging teamwork component. You get to fully apply your communication ability, your ability to influence, and work closely in teams. And the expectations for growth and the ability to grow are very high, so that's challenging as well. Secondly, do you get to work along lines of excellence? That means, does it give you good compensation? And is it rewarding? Is it fulfilling? Do you feel like you're creating value and making an impact and making a difference? I give management consultancy a pretty good score here, an A-. I think that the compensation is very good. Here's a view of the compensation by seniority in thousands of dollars. And there are 2 more levels of seniority beyond the associate partner. In terms of whether it's rewarding, I found it rewarding, but some may feel that it's unfulfilling because you're not bringing a tangible technology, a revolutionary technology to market to improve people's lives, or a service that improves people's lives directly. Your product is knowledge in the form of a PowerPoint deck that you share with your client, hoping that they use it to improve their business and then improve the lives of their customers and their employees. Third, are you able to work in a life-affording scope? I see this as meaning, do you have a work-life balance? Management consulting scored poorly here before the pandemic, and I'm sure someday soon after. Consultants will travel Monday through Thursday, being away from their friends, family, and hobbies they get to work on at home. And on average, will work 14-hour workdays, plus or minus a few hours. It's important to keep in mind, however, that consulting can prepare you for an array of other roles that may be more life-affording, that give you better work-life balance. Here's some data from an executive search firm, and it shows the relative compensation by job function for former consultants. Each of these bars here on the horizontal axis are different job functions that former consultants tend to move into. And I would add electoral politics to the list. The row on the bottom is the number of former consultants in this sample that they studied who went into that function and did that job for a company. So for example, the largest number, 473 consultants, went into a job where they did strategy work for a company. A little bit like the kind of work that I do for DJO Global and the Blackstone Group. I do strategy work for them. The second most common type of job that consultants do after they leave consulting is working in operations. So this 156 people on this sample size are doing leading operations for a company. But the third largest is general management or owning of a profit and loss statement. That means that these people are presidents of a business unit or general managers or CEOs of a company. So each of these different functions, I just want to make the point that you can do a lot of different things after working in consulting. They all have relatively the same compensation, plus or minus 10%, except for investing, which is an outlier. But they can be more life affording. You don't necessarily have to work 14 hours a day in these different jobs. More specifically, is management consultancy right for you? And the way we're going to explore this question is by doing a deep dive into each of the three components of the Greek definition of happiness. So the first one is a full use of your powers. As I mentioned earlier, I think that management consulting is an excellent full use of your powers. And the reason I believe that is because consultants get to apply the scientific method, they grow quickly, and they get to develop knowledge in the form of best practices. So this is the 7-step problem-solving process I showed earlier. It's an adaptation of the scientific method that you get to apply in an agile team manner, working closely with teammates. And I find it very exciting and challenging to get to apply the scientific method every day in my work, to solve problems and to create value for clients and for companies, for the customers, therefore, that benefit from the services offered by those companies. Secondly, it's management consulting gives you an opportunity to grow quickly. Here's a quote from Indra Nooyi, who is a former consultant, former PepsiCo chairman and CEO, and Amazon board of directors she serves on today. She says that she received the equivalent of 10 years of work experience in the 6 years she spent at the Boston Consulting Group because of the breadth of projects she was exposed to. And I really like this quote because it's more modest than what my friends and I thought when we worked in consulting. We thought we were getting 5 times as much experience, but I think Indra Nooyi's got a much better read. And so what you see here is that she did feel like she grew 50% faster when she worked in management consulting. So that's an opportunity to fully use your powers. And finally, consultants get to develop best practices, such as the best-selling book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, by a current consultant, Patrick Lencioni. Consultants develop a lot of other knowledge in the form of best practices that benefit companies, like frameworks for how companies should think about mergers and acquisitions, operations, how to respond to the pandemic, and so on. And I think that can be a very challenging full use of your powers, the ability to develop and push the state of the art on thinking in the business world to help companies. Now a deep dive into the second criteria, lines of excellence. Do you get to work along lines of excellence? I already talked about the compensation component of this, and I've already shown you the data. So in the deep dive now, we're going to focus more on whether the work is rewarding and fulfilling, and whether you get to make a difference in people's lives. Consultants are trusted advisors, and former consultants can be business leaders, which can be rewarding. So consultants are trusted advisors. This is a word cloud of how clients describe their consultants. They see consultants as being trustworthy, experienced, confidential, thoughtful, smart, good listeners. It can be very rewarding to be viewed and treated as a trusted advisor by world leaders, business leaders, And so that can be something that can be a very fulfilling life work. I know that at my company, I and our executives in the company will share sensitive material and details of things that we're planning to do with our consultants, because we really trust them and because we really need their advice on whether we should move forward with certain plans or not. Former consultants, however, can be business leaders, and that can be even more fulfilling potentially. This is another view of that data I showed from the executive search firm. These are all the different functions that consultants move into, things that they do for companies, like doing strategy work for a company, doing operations work. Doing operations work could entail helping your company or leading your company's distribution of the COVID vaccine in a timely manner, or being a general manager or profit and loss owner, meaning being the CEO or president of a business unit that has a very strong purpose that's making people's lives better, or doing marketing work, leading marketing for a company in order to get the word out for that company. Maybe it's a startup, to get the word out to customers about your great product and how it can make people's lives better. So these can all be very rewarding and fulfilling, and they're all open to you if you work in management consulting. Now, finally, the deep dive into the third criteria, whether you can work in the job in a life-affording scope. For various reasons, consultants tend to work overtime. This is a picture of the cover of a Harvard Business Review article by Laura Empson, and the title of the article is, "If you're so successful, why are you still working 70 hours a week?" And my experience was that I worked closer to 65, but close enough. And a quote from the article that she mentions, "The 500 interviews I conducted for my book showed a pattern. A professional's insecurity is rooted in the inherent intangibility of knowledge work. How do you convince your client that you know something worthwhile and justify the high fees you charge?" So I think what Laura's saying in this is that she's found in her research that professionals, such as consultants, because their work is knowledge work and the product is intangible, they may feel some insecurity about that in order to prove some insecurity about proving that they're worth the high fees that they charge, and that might be driving the number of hours a week they work. This is just one perspective. Not everyone agrees with it, but it is something to be aware of. And I want to emphasize again that there are other functions and roles that that consulting can train you for, and that you can work in after a stint in consulting. So let's say that I've piqued your interest and you are curious about exploring a potential career in management consultancy. What does the application process look like? So for entry-level roles, consulting firms hire exceptional problem solvers with decent soft skills. And what I mean by that is the bar for problem solving is very high. That's why I have a coaching company to help people improve their problem solving skills. Although there is there's a pretty strong test for soft skills in the application process, the bar isn't as high as it is for problem solving. The type of problem solving that's required for the role and that's tested in the application process is first your ability to do analytical problem solving, which is can you break down a large complex problem into its component pieces to make it more manageable? Conceptual problem solving, which is your ability to drive qualitative insights from data and to be creative to brainstorm solutions to problems. And then quantitative problem solving, your ability to be comfortable with numbers and to do complex math analysis to drive insights and to support conclusions and recommendations. This is tested in the case interview format that these firms use in the interview process. The three soft skills that are tested for. The first one is personal impact, which is defined as your ability to influence others whom you have no positional authority. your leadership skill, your ability to lead teams of people, to harness the power of diverse thinking to drive results. And then entrepreneurial drive, your ability to overcome obstacles and achieve goals. So these 3 soft skills are tested in the behavioral interview and then the resume screening. So moving now into the final part of the talk, how can you implement this content, the things we've talked about so far in your career? Management consultancy may be an appropriate career for you, or its practices, if you're not interested in a career in management consultancy, its practices can still inform the way you do problem solving in your career or in your line of work. So the question is, does a career in management consultancy appeal to you based on what we've talked about so far? Let's say your answer is yes. Well, maybe then it is right for you. What are some next steps that you can take? The first is you can check out an excellent book called The Elements of the Case Interview, which is going to be published on January 1st by yours truly. Secondly, you can check out the additional resources I have on the next slide. I'll show that in a moment. And also, I think Prabhakar will be posting the slides on the Nunban website. And then third, you can attend the second talk in this 2-part series, in which we'll be doing more of a deep dive into the 7-step problem-solving process that consultants use to solve client problems. Now, let's say that your answer is no to this initial question. You're not interested in a career in management consultancy. You can still incorporate the type of problem-solving that consultants do into your work. If that's the case, if you're interested in doing that, what are some next steps that you can take? The first is you can attend the second talk in this 2-part series, which, as I mentioned, will be about how consultants approach problem solving. Secondly, you can check out the book Bulletproof Problem Solving, which is also a deep dive into the 7-step problem solving process by 2 former consultants, Kahn and McLean. And then third, you can check out the writings by Steve Spear. Steve Spear is someone who's written a lot of good stuff about how Toyota, the automobile company, and other similar companies have been very successful at incorporating a problem-solving culture at all levels of their organizations in order to be better at lean manufacturing, in order to reduce their costs, and to continuously improve and innovate. There's 2 in particular that I like, 2 writings of his. The first is a Harvard Business Review article that starts with the word decoding. And then the second is a book he has on Amazon called High Velocity Edge. Here are the resources that I mentioned on the previous slide if you're interested in a career in management consultancy. Some printable flashcards to get better at the case interview, practice casebooks, my book on Amazon, and my contact information. I really like to keep in touch. And again, these slides will be available on the Nunban website, and you can also email me and to get a copy. But in closing, returning to that question or that idea of management consulting as a noble profession, I want to close with a quote from Clayton Christensen, who is a founder of a consulting firm that focuses on disruptive innovation and a Harvard Business School professor. He passed away earlier this year. This is someone who's done groundbreaking work over his career in disruptive innovation and has helped a lot of companies become a lot more innovative and to develop their R&D processes to bring better products to market to improve the lives of their customers. He wrote a book called How Will You Measure Your Life towards the end of his life, where he based it off his experience working closely and being friends with high-level executives and teaching students at the Harvard Business School. And a quote from the book that I really liked was, "I genuinely believe that management is among the most noble of professions if it's practiced well. No other occupation offers more ways to help others learn and grow, take responsibility and be recognized for achievement, and contribute to the success of a team. Being a management consultant or working in management, it's an opportunity to help organizations improve their performance, to be more innovative, to improve the culture of their companies and the way their companies operate, their ability to develop people, to improve the lives of their employees, to offer better services and products to their customers, to improve the lives of their customers. So it is a noble profession. And regardless of whether you're interested in it or not, I hope that in this talk, I've helped you think more about the type of work that you're doing or that you want to do, no matter what your age is, whether you're able to fully use your powers along lines of excellence in a life-affording scope. Thank you for your attention, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Manu. That was quite detailed with a lot of anecdotes and examples. So I'll open up to the audience now. As to please use the Q&A tab to ask any questions you have of Manu or the topic. If not, I'm going to put Manu on the spot and then ask a couple. So again, use the Q&A tab and then ask your questions, and we're looking forward to answering them. So Manu, while we are waiting for that, let me put you on the spot. So I think you kind of laid out a framework to think about, or kind of why you should think about management consultancy and kind of a framework in terms of how yourself as an example, and then kind of help attendees understand kind of what the journey you went through, in
Yeah, thanks for the question, Prabhakar. Yeah, when I think about my own journey, and let me go back. Did you say something there, Prabhakar? Sorry, you broke up a little bit. So when I think about my own journey, and I'm showing this slide here that shows my journey going back to my PhD, and I think about the three criteria, I think that for me, one of the motivations actually to move from management, from academic research to management consulting was that I felt that maybe it wasn't academia and then moving into consulting. Consulting would be a more full use of my powers along lines of excellence, meaning that I felt that I had a lot to add, a lot to offer to the non-academic research world. I think that you see in a lot of other countries like Germany and China, PhDs playing an important role in the government and throughout the business world. It's not unusual in Germany and China for the leader of the country to be a PhD in both of those countries, and in many others. And similarly in the business world, it's not unusual to see a PhD running a company. So I think I wanted to do something similar, and I thought there was more opportunities for PhDs to play that role in the US, to bring problem solving, the scientific method, and the rigor of the scientific method to management. And so that it really was that quote, the Greek definition of happiness, that motivated that move. And that's how I thought about it in my own career.
Okay. So, kind of a nice segue into a question from our audience here. So what is the least part of your job? You talked a lot about why, one should consider, management consultancy, but now that you're in it, kind of what's the least part of your job, as a question?
You mean the least favorite?
Least favorite part of your job, sorry, my bad.
Are you asking about the least favorite, Prabhakar? Least favorite part?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think that there's so I mentioned that just based on my background, My power is, in using the word power from the quote, my power is the scientific method, problem solving. But a really important part of management is being able to navigate organizational politics and influence other people. And that's something that I've developed over the years, and I've gotten better at it. But sometimes it can be frustrating.
Yeah. Is there anything specific in that, kind of what triggers those, or is just the general comment you made?
Yeah, I think for me specifically, it's I am glad that you asked about more specifics. I would say that it's just spending a lot of time in meetings. I think there's there's some people who are introverts, some people who are extroverts, and they get energy from doing spending time by themselves versus time with other people. And so sometimes you kind of wish that you can just present a data-driven approach and that people would get behind what you're doing. But I think it's good to have a debate. And sometimes for someone like myself, spending a lot of times in meetings can be a little bit exhausting.
Yeah. So another question is from Ramanathan from Chennai. So again, guys, if you have more questions, please do use the Q&A tab. So his question is, so Ramanathan did his MBA from IIT Madras, but the job he got during placement was a consultant, not a management consultant, but a consultant. It's more like a business analyst in an IT services company. This question is, how can you move from a business analyst role, to a management consultancy career? What are the steps he should be taking?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ramanathan. I would say that some of the steps that you can take to move from an IT consulting role to a management consulting role. I think there are a couple of different ways you can go about it. I think that the quickest way is to volunteer and take on the responsibilities of the whenever you're working on a project, of the people on the team who are doing the management part of the project. So you're probably assigned to the IT specific parts of the project. But oftentimes there's more work, and anybody who works in a company that may have not the best organization and roles and responsibilities defined will see that there's always more work to be done than people and time available to do the work. And so anybody who's on your team or on the client's team who is responsible for non-IT components of the job, of the project, whether that's project management, whether that's putting together the financial business case for a big IT project that you are asked to work on, I would encourage you to volunteer to help out with that. Why don't you get involved in building the financial model for a big IT investment that your client's going to make? I think whether it's someone in your organization, in your consulting firm, or someone at your client who's tasked with doing that, I think they would be happy to have your help with developing that financial model. For example, if there's somebody involved in project management, if you can take on some of their work, help them put together the spreadsheets and the software to document all of the project management. I think that's a great way to start to get that exposure, to build relationships with the people who do that kind of work. And then it's something for you to talk about when you network with people, when you, in a cover letter or in a resume, when you apply for for a consulting role, or in an interview. And I think that's an excellent way to make that kind of transition. I've seen a lot of people get promoted simply by volunteering to do the work of their boss or someone else in the organization who is taking on a higher level of responsibility. I think the other path is one that takes a longer time, but that's to do an MBA. I don't think that's necessary, but it's another option.
Okay, great. So a question from Meenakshi is, so what's a typical duration of a consultation? Uh, you know, uh, is it advisable to negotiate the client contract by fixed time or by problem analysis? Kind of what's your guidance on that?
Yeah. So thanks for the question, Meenakshi. I think that I think you're referring to also how the consulting firm negotiates the contract length with the client. So oftentimes it's going to be based on what the goal of the project is. Usually consultants will write a proposal for a project that a company puts out a request for a proposal for. And the consulting firm will lay out how much time they think it takes to achieve that goal. And there's a negotiation about how much time the client's willing to pay for and how much time the consulting firm thinks is required. And I know that Meenakshi also asked about the typical length of the project. If it's a due diligence project, which means there's a very time-sensitive decision on the table, like acquiring another company, the projects can be as short as 2 weeks, and the consulting team needs to work really, really hard in those 2 weeks. But in some cases, if the project is on the opposite extreme, if a company is doing really poorly, they're on the verge of bankruptcy, and they need not only advice, but also hand-holding to get through their challenging situation, to turn themselves around. The project can be half a year or even longer than that. So there's a wide range. I would say that it really just depends on how much distress the client's under and what kind of project it is. And in answer to your second question, there's room for negotiation on how long the project is. It really depends on the challenge the client's facing.
I know you mentioned we kind of slightly, doing a little bit of a segue or deviation from the previous question, but kind of goes back to a comment you made earlier, which is kind of, people doing one way to move into management consultancy is doing an MBA. Along those lines, another question is certifications. Are there any specific certifications, which might help, people kind of, move into a consultancy career, management consultancy career?
Yeah. I would say that there's none that are absolutely necessary. I would say there's no coursework, I think, or certifications that are they're directly applicable, because the skill set that at the entry level that is tested for is the general one, problem solving. And so you really are needing to improve your case interview skill, which is what my company focuses on, which is your ability to show your problem solving skill in the case interview format. So that's the only really direct kind of coursework and learning that's applicable. However, I do think that a business skill set that's really, really helpful, but absolutely not necessary, because I did it after I worked in consulting, is a finance skill set. I think doing a lot of courses in corporate finance and investing, I think it really helps you understand how companies work a lot better. But consulting firms don't just serve for-profits and businesses. They serve nonprofits and governments as well. So that's why I say the finance skill set is really just a nice optional one. The most important certification or directly applicable coursework would be on problem solving.
So I think there are a couple of questions here where people are in different fields. So one is in like IT services for about 20 years, and another, Alamelu, is a medical student. So I think the question is more around, okay, so I'm in a different field. How do I shift to management consultancy? I know you covered that in your presentation a bit, maybe kind of, reiterating it and then kind of, giving them some pointers might help here. So I'm in a different field. How do I move to management consultancy? IT
Yeah.
or
Yeah, so Prabhakar, you mentioned IT and medicine, right? Those
Yeah.
are the two examples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, both very valuable skill sets in consulting, because so many companies right now are looking, especially this is a trend before the pandemic, digital transformation. It's one of the functions I worked on quite a bit, even in 2017. And so I can't imagine now, after the pandemic, IT and digital transformations are just companies they need so much help with that. And then medicine, same. Actually, my thoughts are the same. That skill set, being able to understand a clinical perspective, the patient's perspective, it's so specialized and therefore and applicable. And healthcare is 17% of GDP, right, in the U.S. Very valuable skill set that, because of the pandemic, is going through this incredibly rapid change right now. Digital medicine in particular. So both are very applicable skill sets, and the reason I mention that is consulting firms really need that kind of knowledge. And so in order to make that transition, I think the first step is to identify consulting firms that where their approach is to bring people with a lot of special industry experience. Well, there's two different examples you talked about, Prabhakar. I think one person you mentioned was in medicine, and the other one was had work experience in IT. If you have work experience, there are certain consulting firms that they want their consultants to have had work experience outside of consulting, and I think the first step would be to identify what those consulting firms are. Accenture is an example. Alex Partners is another example. There are many others. For the person who is in medicine right now, if they're early in their career, there are another set of consulting firms that prefer people to be entry-level people to be fresh graduates. And so, McKinsey, BCG, and Bain are examples of those. I would target those. And really, you just once you've identified a firm that's a good match, are the plural firms that are a good match, I think the next step is to prepare for the case interview format, and I think that's a sufficient set of steps in order to make that transition. But there's no doubt that you can make that transition with those skill sets because they're so valuable today in consulting specifically.
Would you recommend that they kind of stick with their field of expertise as they move into management consultancy? So they find firms which are looking for with the IT background, or in the case of the student, medical background, or it doesn't matter what the background is when they move into the management consultancy in terms of interviewing and other aspects.
Yeah, I think that it depends on whether you have a lot of work experience or not. If you do, then you probably want to stick with. You probably want to. It's going to be necessary to stick with that area. Mm-hmm. If you don't, if you're just graduating from medical school, for example, then you can do other things. And actually, it's kind of I would recommend that because a lot of innovations in medicine are going to come about from learning from other industries. A lot of surgical robots used in surgeries. There's a lot that medical companies can learn from what Uber is doing with self-driving cars, for example. So I think, and similarly with what Amazon's doing right now with digital pharmacies, I think the healthcare field can learn from that. I think it's useful to get some exposure to other industries, but in the long term, that medical skill set is so valuable. I would recommend that you, in the long term, settle in the medical space within consulting.
Mm. So you mentioned COVID, and then there's a question from Pichapanan about how has COVID changed the role of management consultants and also the opportunities? Because his point is these consultants are mostly working on problems, meeting people in person, working closely with teams. Has COVID changed the approach, reduced demand? Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure how that's going to change. I know right now that consultants aren't traveling, but a big part of, they invested a lot in travel before. I was always on the client side from Monday to Thursday. And, it's important because that's how you build trust. Otherwise, you're kind of seen as this, people don't recognize who you are the clients don't recognize who you are when you present to them. If you need to get data from a client, if you want to learn about the experience of a lower level employee, it's a lot easier if you're on the client side. So I think that consultants will go back to the way things were. And I think a lot of companies are also, there are some companies that are hiring remote workers, but I think most companies still want to eventually get back to the being in the office, and I think therefore consultants will follow suit.
Okay. So the next question is from a high school student, where he or she is asking about the importance of university brand names. So to break into management consulting profession. For example, if you go through a state school, is it going to make it harder versus going to private or Ivy League or kind of is there like a specific set of universities where these consulting firms really look towards in terms of their hire, and what are the and the other part of the question is what are the majors you recommend as part of the undergraduate study?
Yeah. I think it used to matter a lot which school you went to. I think this is when consulting firms were smaller and also the recruiting operations were smaller. They only had the resources to target a few schools. That's changed drastically. There are consultants from all of the best state schools, and within their consulting firm, they take on the initiative to set up an on-campus recruiting tradition to go to their school. And so I think all of the, any large state school is going to have a strong relationship with the consulting firms. So I don't think that the brand matters anymore. Maybe 10 to 20 years ago, maybe it did. It really doesn't matter anymore. In terms of the major, I think the finance skill set is very valuable, but it doesn't need to. I don't think you need a major in it though. I think it's very useful to take courses in corporate finance and investing. But otherwise, I think working on a major that really just it doesn't have to be any major in particular. I'm just thinking about what would be the ideal major or characteristics of a major. I think one of the most important things is to work on interdisciplinary content. I majored in physics, for example, and one of my favorite things about the major was that I got a bachelor's degree without ever having to give a presentation. And I actually at the time I thought that was awesome. But that's it's important to work in teams and to do presentations because that's what you do in the real world. So I think it's important to do a major that lets you develop your quantitative skills, like physics or math or finance or whatever, but also that lets you think about working in teams and thinking about qualitative things as well.
Okay, great. So net it out. I mean, there isn't like a specific one you're recommending, but kind of, making sure that you have a horizontal, or breadth is what you would suggest, so that people learn different skill sets as part of their curriculum, in school, so that um, uh, they're more, they're able to kind of span across multiple needs. Is that a good way to think about it?
Exactly, right. Exactly. So the opposite of what I did
Yeah.
by
That's
doing
good.
physics.
Good. All right. So there are a couple of questions here, kind of, when you're in, you kind of moved into management consultancy, or you're in a team or in a firm. So the two questions, on that vector are, one from, Pal is, many times it looks like, he and other members of the team, they go really deep technically, okay? And then they kind of miss the big picture. How do you, I mean, they're looking for some guidance on how do you deal with that natural tendency to always kind of, see the forest from the trees, is the question.
What was the first part, the example that you mentioned,
I
Prabhakar, the
mean,
first part of the question?
yeah, Pal and his team members, they're technical folks. They go really deep down in the details and then miss the big picture. And so when you're in a firm, doing consultancy work, how do you kind of always keep the broader picture in mind? You kind of keep the forest from the trees.
Yeah, that's a great question from Pal. I want to use the 7-step problem solving approach here to answer that. So let me pull that up. So and we're going to talk, this is the 7-step problem solving process. And what Pal is talking about is step 5 here, which is to conduct the analysis. Get really deep into the technical analysis, the development of the code, testing of the code, maybe some measurements of the quality of the code, the speed, accuracy, all those kinds of things. In order to think more broadly and to think about the forest from the weeds, as you put it, is I think to focus on these first 4 steps a little bit more. So the first is just defining the problem. What's the goal? This company, maybe you're developing an IT solution for a company, and you want to define the problem. The problem is, how do we develop a solution that's going to significantly, maybe 10x, improve the experience of our customers at the minimum cost, or maybe under a certain cost, within a certain time period. That's the first step. The second step is to structure the problem, which is to really think about, as broadly as possible, what are the different factors involved. There's the cost side of things, there's the time side of things, and then there's the customer experience. And for the customer experience, you can map out the customer journey using design thinking, for example. What are all the pain points of the customer? So that's the third branch of an issue tree, or structuring of a problem. So this kind of, you lay that out and make sure it's in a prominent location where you can see it, and always keep that in perspective. And then third is to prioritize issues. Maybe maybe you only have 2 months to do this project, and there are certain pain points the customer has that are going to be really, really difficult to address. So maybe you keep that for phase 2 of the project. So you deprioritize that, and you prioritize things that you can actually make a difference, sizable impact on in the first 2 months. So that's the prioritize issue step. And then step 4 is to plan the analysis and the work. So we don't want to, we have certain things we want to prioritize, like we want to give the customer the ability to get notifications when their prescription is available. So let's kind of think about what's the analysis and work that we need to do to accomplish that first piece. So that's how I would think about staying broad.
Excellent. Again, on the same, a slightly different vector, but again, this is from Alagappan, where when you're you're already in the firm, in terms of career advancement, do you move up in terms of is it better to move up in terms of a partner from being a consultant, or move out into a private company and lead in more leadership roles? So can you give some your sense of what is there any particular path you would recommend? What are the challenges, and is continuing to stay in one or move to other kind of as Alapan is asking, is it boring? So basically the question is moving up within the consulting ladder chain versus moving out into a private kind of how do you weigh those things?
Yeah, it's a great question from Alagapan. I think it's something I thought about a lot. I think that of course it's all either is a great option, and it's a personal decision. I think that the pros and cons, there are pros and cons of both. I think that for me, one of the big ones about moving out was when you work in a company and you can manage a larger team, you can actually potentially manage the whole company. Be a CEO or a president of a business unit or a president of a function. And so if you're really interested in that broader or larger scale leadership, then moving out is the way to go. Because in consulting, the most leadership you do, even the partner level, you're managing a team of maybe at most 8 people. And those 8 people are super high performers, so there's not really even much management involved. So it's not that much of a leadership challenge. So if you really value leadership, I think moving out is going to be a better option for you. I think that if you prefer to be an advisor, then staying within consulting is the way for you. But if you prefer to actually be a leader and try to take on the stress of managing a team to get things done, then moving out is the way to go. So I think there are pros and cons. I think in terms of compensation, staying in consulting, there's more certainty. It's kind of well known what the standardized compensation is, and you're going to get promoted within a certain number of years. So that security and certainty is there. If you move outside of consulting, there's all kinds of uncertainties. Things change in a company, companies downsize, as we see during the pandemic. You never know when you're going to get a promotion. It depends on how organizational dynamics play out. So those are some of the pros and cons.
Okay. All right. I know we are at time, so let's take the last set of questions, and then these questions are around liabilities, work-life balance stuff. So let's start with the liabilities. So the question from Meenakshi Ramaswamy is, what are the liabilities with management consulting? And then I think he's looking for some measures and best practices to limit liabilities.
Right. Anything that you can add on what you might mean by liabilities, Prabhakar?
I think that's. Okay. Then actually, if you're still on the call, please do. If you can clarify what you mean by liabilities, that'll help Manu with answering the question.
I'm just not sure if liabilities to the client or kind of things that are downsides about the job.
I suspect this is going to be liabilities from the client side. So, let's wait to hear from her or okay. Him. Sorry, my bad. So the next set of questions are around, as I mentioned, work-life balance. So, for example, Lakshmi here talks about, or asking you, how difficult was it, when you said, you spend about 65 hours per week. how difficult how do you go about managing it? And then there's another question from, there's an anonymous person, looks like he or she was in KPMG for about 3 years and found it extremely hard, because of the stress and the work-life balance. And so, looking for your guidance or recommendations in terms of how do you manage it, and how can others kind of learn from that?
Yeah. So I think in terms of how you can manage it, I think one is to, the most important thing is if you enjoy it, then it's a lot more palatable. And I would say, can you work with your manager to identify a work stream within the project that you're going to enjoy, being proactive on getting onto projects that you're going to enjoy. If it's something you want to learn about, a certain function, a certain industry, a certain client. So that's the first thing before you even get onto the project, or even after you get onto the project. So working with the staffing system to get onto a project that you're going to enjoy, and then working with your manager once you get onto a project like that to identify a work stream that you're going to enjoy. So I think that's the first thing. I think that the second thing that is important to keep in mind is that you need to, as best as possible, learn how to say no. Part of that is because it's expected that you only take on what you can do. And it's really a valuable skill to be able to under-promise and over-deliver. So if you can be conservative about what you think you can accomplish in a given day or in a given evening, do that. Be conservative. Say, I'm not sure I can finish all of this, so maybe let's plan for a little bit less than that. I think that's the second thing. That way you can feel, even when you're working on it, you're going to feel less stressed because you're over-delivering. You know that you're doing more than you promised. So being able to learn how to promise less is a really important skill, so that you can then over-deliver on it. I think those are two. I think that the third one is making it a priority to do things that make you feel good. Kind of the basic things like exercising, getting enough sleep, making sure you're not losing sight of your priorities. If there's a significant other you want to communicate with every day, trying to make a little bit of time for that. I think those things help as well.
Excellent. So all right, let's close with, Meenakshi did clarify. Let's close with that. We're already, 6 minutes over. It's about getting, sued by the client. Basically, that on the client side.
Yeah. And this has been a topic in the news quite a bit with some consulting firms. I think it's a good question. I'd have to think about it a little bit. I think that the most important thing is, well, it's not just about being sued by the client. I think the reason that I'm thinking about this a lot is, some consulting firms have gotten in trouble because their client got in trouble, and so that's a big liability too. In terms of just getting sued by your client, I think that's something that the consultants, in my experience, are good at avoiding, and because they're so. It's like that quote from the Harvard Business Review article about working 70 hours a week. Consultants are actually very client focused. They really want to be trusted advisors. They really want to retain clients. They really want to make sure clients are happy. And it's a very regular practice to under-promise and over-deliver. So I think that's not as much of a problem. I think what the problem is that sometimes consultants serve clients that get in trouble, like Enron. Maybe it's a government, the South African government. There was a story about that some time ago. I think Goldman Sachs got in trouble with another company. So I think that's what's more challenging. And, I think the way that you manage that is to really be, and I think some consulting firms say they do this, and some of them are better at it than others, but really being selective about the type of clients you serve in the first place, and identifying what the liabilities are of serving that client, and really assessing the legal risk that client is facing. Not that you're facing as a consultant, but that the client is facing. If they're selling opioids, what are the legal liabilities there, and do you want to be a part of that or not? Even if your intentions are good, even if your intentions are to try to protect patients from overdosing on opioids, if you get mixed up in that, and your client does the wrong thing, it's difficult to kind of disentangle yourself.
Okay. All right. So I know you said we'll close with that, but there's one final question, which is an interesting one for you to, help out with. This is from Mayappan of Nacharam, where he says that his son is in business school, and he's being told that to get into the top 4 consulting firms, his son has to have a 4.0, GPA, and be either an honor student or a dean scholar, etc. Is this true?
I don't think that. I think that a GPA of 3.5 and above is. Don't take my word for it, but I think at least at the undergraduate level, I think a 3.5 and above is sufficient. I didn't go to business school, so I don't know if that applies for the business school as well. But if anything, business school is probably harder than getting a high GPA in undergraduate. And so, I think that's my take on that question. I think I think what's more important is your ability to do well on the case interview.
Awesome. All right. So thank you, Manu, and thank you for the audience for the wonderful questions. And I know we went 10 minutes over. Apologies for that. Thank you again. Thank you, Manu. And the recording will be available both to the Nandan website, and then we will work with NSNA on how to send it out. So thank you again, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks a lot, Prabhakar.